More on how China and Cuba will move forward with their ties. Let's turn to current affairs commentator Einar Tangen. He's joining us from Beijing. First, well, I want to go back just a little bit. Fidel Castro did a rare interview when he was visiting China back in 1995. Tensions at the time high between the U.S. and Cuba. I want to play this quick sound for you, and I want to get your reaction afterwards. Let's take a listen.
Primero ocurrió algo más grave.
The U.S. government imposes the economic sanctions because they don't want an independent Cuba, but we're taking measures to fight against and develop under those sanctions. What I can tell you, our Chinese friends, is that Cuba is rolling out policies similar to China's reform and opening up policies.
A certain amount of confidence as he talks there. I want to get your thoughts on what he had to say.
Well, Mike, I think it was more verbal assurance than reality. Actually, he did not open up that much, and it did not follow the kind of economic reforms that China has. His brother has done it on a very limited basis. But Cuba is facing a very difficult situation as it goes forward because Venezuela, who's been a big part of their economic situation, being very friendly, cheap oil, their situation is very dire, and that is going to dry up one way or the other. So the question is, which way does Cuba go? Trump is a big question. China has been a steady friend. The question is, how will this nation with very few resources go forward?
And Fidel Castro cast such a long shadow. It would have been difficult for Raul Castro to go too far with reforms, one would think. Do you think things change with his death?
Well, that is the expectation. There's been lots of whispers, but you hear these things on the international media, so it's not always clear exactly if this is wishful thinking or the actual things. We'll have yet to see. I do expect that since he introduced these reforms, the ability to hold private property, small businesses, which now account for 20% of the workforce, I think this will continue because it's been successful. There's been a very, very modest growth in the GDP. I think they want to see that. They're looking forward to opening up their tourism, and they're very much in need of outside investment.
Talk to us a little bit more about this closeness of the relationship. We heard from Wang Wei, President Xi Jinping making sure to see him in 2014. Again, Premier Li making sure to see him in September, just a couple of months ago. Talk to me about the closeness of this relationship. What did Fidel Castro mean to China, do you think?
Well, I mean, he was the founding father of what is now modern Cuba. He's a Mao Zedong-esque figure in that respect, and he was somebody who held out against a lot of economic pressure from the U.S. Remember, during these times that there was assassinations attempts that numbered in the hundreds against him. He was seen as an enemy, the Cuban Missile Crisis, things like that. Through all that period, China was a steady ally, not as much as the USSR, which was providing a lot of economic aid at that time and was very involved. But China has always been in the background as a steady ally, and it's one of those relationships, especially as China continues its charm offensive throughout South America. Cuba will probably remain quite firmly attached to China and perhaps even follow its economic leadership, or its role model, more closely.
And you brought up this relationship with the U.S. The U.S. policy towards Castro was one of regime change. You mentioned the assassination attempts, of course, Bay of Pigs, we all know about that. He would be an irritant, though, to 11 U.S. presidents. In the end, he was never brought to his knees. In fact, just this year, a U.S. president came and visited Havana. So what do you think that legacy will be?
Well, he'll stand out as a kind of a David versus Goliath figure throughout history. He was, as you pointed out, able to withstand the pressure of the most powerful unipower in the world at that time. So, yeah, he will continue. It's the stuff of legends. But it also points out that being a successful revolutionary does not necessarily mean that you're a tremendous administrator. There are great goals in terms of healthcare, education, a much more equal society, but Cuba did not participate in the same way that China has in the last 30 years in terms of modernizing and bringing a moderate prosperity to its people.
Einar Tangen joining us from Beijing. Thanks so much.